All right. Whoa, that's loud. All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. I've got 1:30. Welcome to this afternoon's Volkswagen Stakeholder Advisory Committee meeting. I'm so happy to see so many people here, and it sounds like we've got several on the phone. We are live streaming the meeting. We were hoping everybody would be able to get to us today, considering all the flooding and such going around, not just in Jeff City, but throughout the state. So we thank you for that. We got a full agenda for you today. We're going to talk about what we've done so far in 2019 and what our tentative plans are for 2020. So we do have some presentation slides that we'll share with you. About halfway through, we're going to pause and see if you all want to take a break. If you need anything, make sure and stop us for questions. Just on that note, the restrooms, if you haven't been in this building before, the easiest way would be to go out the door down at that end of the building and turn right. If you can't find them, the receptionist is very helpful and she'll help you, I'm sure, but they are pretty well marked. The other thing we want to remind everybody, since we're live streaming and we have folks on the phone, if you can please, when you speak into a microphone so that everybody can hear you. The microphones are scattered throughout on the table, but we also have a mobile one that will walk around. And with that, we'll go ahead and start with introductions, which I should have told you who I was first, so I apologize, that's not on my list of things here. But my name's Darcy Bybee. I'm the director of the Air Pollution Control Program. The AIR program is taking the lead in implementing the Volkswagen Beneficiary Mitigation Trust in Missouri for the state of Missouri with all of you fine folks. And those of us that have participated on the advisory committee throughout time, we've seen our group grow, both in the room here with our stakeholder partners and also with our team at the program. So as we go around, we're going to have a lot of new faces to share with you from the Air Pollution Control Program. And with that, I'll pass the mic, literally.
Oh, no.
Yes, I'm Carrie Gerald with the AIR program as well.
Is this one on? Okay. I'm Stacy Allen with the AIR program.
I'm Wes Fitzgibbons. I'm also with the AIR program.
I'm Pat Justice with Ameren, Missouri.
Joe Pemberton, Missouri Association for Pupil Transportation.
Hi, I'm Deborah Plank. I'm the manager of student transportation with the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Lynn Shea with Associated Electric.
Mark Woodson with Associated Electric.
Jane Hines, City of Concord.
Sarah Lambrice, Metropolitan Energy Center.
Sandy Lanier, Ross County.
Paul Brugman with Cummins.
John Glad, Osage County.
Steve Wilson, Ozarks Coca-Cola.
John Jervis, Highland Dairy.
Jason Castle, Belfoni Ice Cream.
Darrell Griffin, Presiding Commissioner of Osage County.
Larry Clay Thermos, Commissioner of Osage County.
Ron Kepker from Osage County Road and Bridge.
Joe Gilliam, Citizen. Jeremy Tan, Southeast Missouri Regional Planning Commission.
Sean Michael Stanley, AIR program.
Mark Leith with the AIR program.
Aaron Basham, AIR program.
Ken Pierce, Midwest Transit, IC Bus.
Joe Crabtree, Midwest Transit, IC Bus.
Kevin Hurtler, St. Louis Clean States.
Wendy Vitt, Geoengineers.
I'm Kira Moore. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Environmental Quality.
Sherry Morgan, AIR program.
David Little, City Utilities of Springfield.
Kathy Macy, DNR Budget Program.
Leah Hines, DNR Accounting Program. Heather Lehman, Air Program.
Don Margaret, Cooper County Commission.
David Booker, Cooper County Commission. Ernest Wilson, AIR program.
Byron Murray, Public Service Commission.
Dave Fraley with the Ozarks Clean Air Alliance.
Clint Beaver, AmeriGas.
Kevin O'Neill, AmeriGas.
Brenda Wansing, Air Program.
Andy Pop, Missouri Division of Energy.
John Eccleston, Energy Policy.
Emily Wilbur with the Air Program.
Richard Waters, DNR General Counsel's Office.
Deidre Vi Stegman, Air Program.
Shelley Reimer, Air Program.
George Storigas with the air program.
Okay, for the folks that are on the phone line, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Pam Ratliff with Lafayette County.
Henry Robertson, Sierra Club.
Crystal Jones, Woodland Hills Regional Planning Commission.
Kelly Gilbert with Massachusetts Center and Kansas City Regional Clean Cities Coalition.
Mark Collins, Howell County.
Ed Young, Central State Club.
Gary Youngerman, Callaway County.
Jayla Dunn,
Natasha
Longpine. Go ahead.
That's everyone, thanks.
All right, just a couple other reminders. There are agendas on the table if you need a copy of the agenda. It's got just the basics of what we're going to go over today. And then also there's a sign-in sheet if you can make sure and sign in for us. All right, well with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to try dimming the lights. If that's worse, let us know and we can turn them back on. We do have some slides with some data on there that might be easier to see if the lights were dimmed. Okay. All right, so just some quick bullet points of what we're going to go over today. The background of why we're all here, the background and a brief discussion on all the work that we all put into on the beneficiary mitigation plan. Then we'll review what we've done thus far in state fiscal year 2019, which goes through the end of June, and then our tentative plans for next year. And then also talk about the implementation guidelines. If you're on the listservs and the Gov deliveries, you'll see that there are 4 guidelines open for comment right now. So background. I would assume everybody in this room is here because you know that there was an issue that Volkswagen settled with the federal government for a pretty big settlement back a couple of years ago. It was all based upon the fact that in 2015, Volkswagen admitted to using this software that allowed certain makes and models of their vehicles to emit NOx emissions in far greater quantities than what is allowed under EPA standards. So there were about 590,000 affected vehicles throughout the nation, and about 7,500 of those were here in Missouri, registered in Missouri. So you can see on the map here, this is the same map we've shown a lot. Those 7,500 vehicles were, well, maybe not the majority, but a good portion were found in the St. Louis area, followed by Kansas City, Boone County, and Greene County, and then throughout the rest of the state. So the 7,500 vehicles were scattered around, and that 7,500 is what is the basis for the amount of money that we in Missouri receive. So of the $2.9 billion that Volkswagen paid into this piece of their settlement, into the Environmental Mitigation Trust, of that $2.9 billion, Missouri's share is about $41 million. So the $41 million, again, based on those 7,500 vehicles, in my mind is kind of the minimum amount of money that the state of Missouri would receive, because in the event that states don't spend all of their money or tribes don't spend all of their money, it would roll back into the trust and then get divided out again. But $41 million is a lot of money, and that can fund a lot of great projects here in Missouri. The funds are to be used to counteract those excess NOx emissions from those Volkswagen vehicles that were affected. The trust is in some ways very prescriptive, and in other ways it does give a lot of opportunity for states and tribes to choose what really makes sense for them. So the trust outlines these 10 categories. These are the only things that the money can be used to pay for, and it talks about each of these categories and different requirements and stipulations on each of the categories. So that gets us to Missouri. So the trust outlines, as I said, pretty prescriptive in some ways what you can do, but it does give some leeway. States, tribes would work through a public process, which we did with your all's help, to develop the beneficiary mitigation plan that makes sense for us. So we had a series of stakeholder meetings. Many of you I recognize. It's awesome to see people that we've worked with throughout this process, but it's also great to see new faces. We worked through the process to finalize our beneficiary mitigation plan, and I use that term "our" very collectively. Every person in this room and those that participated throughout the process helped us get to this point today. And the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, or BMP, does really set those high goals to spending the money, looking at reducing NOx emissions and other goals that we decided together through our advisory committee. Talks about the percentage of funds for each category, talks about considering areas with a disproportionate air quality burden and different things like that. Also talks about the estimation of emission benefits that we'll get from spending the money in the categories. So this is from the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan. You'll see on the left that we've estimated that there were about 750 tons lifetime NOx emissions from those vehicles that were registered in Missouri. On the right, you can see what we're estimating we're going to get back from spending the money and using it on the projects that we've outlined in our plan. So anywhere from 1,200 to 2,000 tons is what we're expecting to reap from the funds that we're able to spend throughout the state. Just a kind of overview of what the BMP, and it is available on the webpage in case you've forgotten or have questions or maybe haven't looked at it yet. It's a good summary of really where we're going with the money. Again, the overall goal is to reduce NOx emissions from mobile sources, but we as a group also decided that we had some other goals ourselves. Replace aging school bus fleets, and you'll hear here in a moment some of what we've already done with that regard. Reducing diesel and gasoline fuel consumption, upgrading government and private fleets, targeting areas that currently or historically have not met air quality goals. The St. Louis area has been considered non-attainment for ozone standards for 30 plus years. It is a smaller non-attainment area now than ever before, but we do still have ozone issues in St. Louis. Historically, we have had them in Kansas City, and we have a couple other areas of the state that have been on the cusp in the past. So our plan talks about that. Also talks about targeting areas with those affected vehicles and also promoting electric vehicles. So here's the categories out of the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, where we as a group again decided how to allocate the money through the process. I'll spend just a little bit of time on this because some of you guys have heard us talk about it and have participated in the process that set this. But just to give you the context for it, because we're going to be talking about all of these categories here this afternoon. The first three categories, well, first I'll also mention that we have 8 on here. There were 10 that I showed you from the trust. The reason is we've just reorganized them. The trust separated out things like large and medium trucks and things like that. So we just organized it in a way that made a little bit more sense to us. So the top 3 categories: school buses, government trucks, transit, and shuttle buses. Those are the 3 categories you'll hear a lot about today with regard to what we've already funded in fiscal year 2019. And those are the categories that we expect on the far right, that funding level to be the minimum amount of money that we would spend in the category. So $12 million on buses, 6 for government trucks, and approximately 4 for transit shuttle. The categories below the line, the non-government trucks, locomotive and marine, airport cargo equipment, DERA, and electric vehicle charging stations, all of those are what we would expect to be the maximum that we would spend in each of those categories. The reason for that is that we do have some experience in implementing some, like a locomotive or marine project, and sometimes those are projects that are hard to find. And so we certainly don't want to leave money on the table. We want to make sure that we are able to spend all of our money so it doesn't get rolled to another state or tribe. But so the thought is that we will open the categories up. We'll see if we can fund the projects. If it turns out we don't have any projects in some of those categories, that money would then roll up above the line. So it would be reallocated to the school buses, government trucks, transit shuttle buses. The one thing I'd point out here is that, again, the trust in some ways is very prescriptive. It does say that we can allocate no more than 15% to the electric vehicle charging stations, and so that's where the $6 million in particular came from, was based upon that requirement. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team, and we're going to give you some more details on what we've done so far, what we're planning in the future. Again, if you have questions, just make sure your mic's on so that everybody can hear you. But this is your meeting. We just want to share this information with you and continue the discussion moving forward. Here. All right.
Okay. Again, I'm Carrie Gerald with Air Program. I'm going to talk about a review of what we did in fiscal year 2019, which was July 1st of 2018 to June 30th, 2019, which hasn't quite ended yet. I'm going to go over these things, like Darcy said, what are the top things, meaning what we've had activity in this fiscal year. We have funded school buses, government trucks, transit shuttle buses, and then we've also had some activity with the electric vehicle infrastructure, and Stacey Allen will be talking about that here in a few minutes. So with the funding, we actually were able to fund a lot of school buses this year. As you can see, $4.7 million. 2.7 of that went to financially disadvantaged schools, where we replaced the entire bus, which was really awesome. I know Shelley has a lot of good stories about that. $2 million went for cost share school bus replacements, which I'll talk about here in a second. DEER option, and then regular DEER funds, government trucks, $600,000, transit shuttle buses, $400,000. Corrections, which is a little side line item, which totaled $7.25 million. Okay, and then the school bus replacement. So for the cost share buses, this was a 25% cost share, so the districts would fund 75% of the school bus, and we would fund 25% up to $22,000. And we received applications from 67 entities for the replacement of 137 eligible buses, 64 of those being from public schools, 3 from privately owned school bus contractors, including replacements from DERA for 29 of those. And then financially disadvantaged districts, like I said, those were funded 100% up to $100,000 from data identified by DESE and Highway Patrol. And funding was approximately $2.7 million for those. And this is a map. You can't really read the districts on there, but you can kind of see that those are mostly rural areas where the financially disadvantaged school districts are identified there. Okay. Then what we're getting to here, the whole point of this, of these Volkswagen funds, is to reduce NOx, like Darcy said. And you can see there's been almost 64 tons of NOx reduced just in this fiscal year by the replacement of these school buses, which is really awesome. And you can see all the different categories where this came from regular, the cost share, category 1, financially disadvantaged, and then the DERA. And then approximate funding to date, Darcy went over that school buses were planned to do $12 million total. We've already cut into $4.7 million of that, so we're doing pretty well. Okay, government trucks. So we had set aside funds for those, showing in that pie graph on the left for the St. Louis area, about half at $1.5 million, Kansas City 600,000, and the rest of the state at 900,000. We didn't use all of that money in this fiscal year, but we have the set aside funds still. They're going to roll into a next application period. St. Louis 800,000, Kansas City 600,000. We used the whole 900,000 for the rest of the state. So the results of those, the NOx reduction, you can see government trucks, there is a 1A and a 1B, which basically we opened the application period in November of last year, and it closed January 11th, and we got some applications for that, and we're able to fund about $580,000. And then we opened it back up and let some of those people revise their applications to make it more competitive, and we actually were able to award over $1 million for those. So altogether, we got a pretty good amount of NOx reduced this fiscal year. Okay, and transit shuttle bus replacement. Again, this is like the government truck slide, the pie graph showing what was set aside for St. Louis, about half with $1 million, Kansas City 400,000, and the rest of the state 600,000. And there were some funds left over. You can see St. Louis 900,000, Kansas City 400, and the rest 200,000. And the results of that, round 1A, $392,000 awarded, and NOx reduced at 15 tons, and round 1B, 75,000 at 1.66 tons. Department of Corrections. So we had 9 projects submitted to us, and total funding they had up to $1 million, and they replaced 4 medium trucks, 4 large trucks, and 1 transport bus with a reduction of 26.31 tons. Electric vehicles, easy.
All right, thanks, Carrie. Again, Stacy Allen with the department. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Work Group has done for the last year. Unlike transit and shuttle, school bus, and government trucks, we haven't spent any money yet, but we're doing the steps to get ready to spend some money in this area. So based on our stakeholders, when we formatted our BMP, they decided we'd spend that maximum 15% allowed under the trust. And in order to do that, our stakeholders said, hey, why don't you guys do a specific targeted group of EV knowers, the people who are in the know in electric vehicles. So we had a separate kickoff meeting last November, the 29th, and out of that meeting was formed 3 subgroups to really dive into the details. So the 3 subgroups that were formed were goals, roadmap, and milestones, barriers in development, and strategies for implementation and deployment. Those 3 subgroups are each led by a stakeholder, not by myself. I'm more of a facilitator for these meetings. I also do a little bit of work for the groups as needed, and just keep them focused on what the BMP says, what our overall plan says. So the stakeholders really taking the lead on this to dive into the details. And then through the winter, from November until March, the subgroups went out, did a lot of work, did a lot of research, and kind of formatted a plan to move forward. We got back together in this room in March and reported back out for those subgroups. And I think we had really good work done, and that sets us up to be successful within the bounds of what the beneficiary mitigation plan tells us. So the things that the plan tells us is that maximum 15%, about $6 million, will be spent on light-duty, zero-emission vehicle infrastructure projects, according to the trust. And our overall stakeholders said, let's not spend money on hydrogen, although that's allowed. They felt that electric vehicle infrastructure was the way to go. And we are going to focus on the highway corridors first. That came out of the stakeholder process. So in thinking about that highway corridor and thinking about the work that the subgroups did on the electric vehicle infrastructure, I'm going to pop up a map. It's really busy. You can't see all the details on here. But there's little round dots placed around this map. And this is not a map of what's out there now for electric vehicle infrastructure. This would be a proposed map to get the group to a place where you could travel on most major highways in the state of Missouri with your electric vehicle. So it meets some minimum distance criteria, hits the highly traveled interstates, also hits some of our major population centers. And this would be supportive of a fast charge, so charging on the matter of minutes instead of hours. There's approximately 40 dots on this map. Some of those dots are in place because Electrify America, which is a subsidiary or spinoff of Volkswagen that was formed as another part of doing the emission benefit, because of the Volkswagen excess emissions. Electri America's already got Interstate 70 and I-44 with DC fast chargers. They're in operation now. So some of these docks have already taken place, and some of these docks are still to come. But that's what this network represents. It's a starting point. Some of the docks may change, thanks to Pat Justice and Missouri EV Collaborative. Is that the name of the group? It was a group of utilities and other environmental stakeholders who got together and kind of came up with a plan, presented it to the department and stakeholders, and we kind of latched onto it and are moving forward with this as a plan. So it's a great map, and I think in the coming years you might be able to see this get built out. That would be the plan. And with that, our next steps for our electric vehicle infrastructure group is to continue our subgroup work and maybe work on a draft request for proposals so that we can start thinking about what would it look like if we go out and ask people what would it take to get some of this network built. And creating that timeline now that we have appropriations. That appropriations process, we wait until May to find out what we are given permission to spend. That was kind of making us wait just a little bit, but that happened in May. So now we know how much the department's going to be spending in fiscal year 20. So starting July 1st of this year, we know what we have to spend. And with that, I'll lead it off to Emily, and she's going to talk about our FY 2020 plans.
Hello. So, as Darcy said in the beginning, we were going to try to take a break in the middle. This is probably about the halfway point of the presentation. I know we're giving out a lot of information and just looking around the room and seeing if anybody wants to take a break, have a few questions on the first half of the presentation or anything like that. Kind of open it up.
Does anybody on the phone have a question?
Okay, well, thank you to...
Oh, just a second. Go ahead.
This is David Johnson with the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority. Just some general feedback about why we didn't apply for the bus funding. Our federal programs have a better match and don't require us to destroy the vehicle. And just wanted to let you guys know that's why we didn't apply. We applied for a non-revenue vehicle and weren't selected. And I think you guys are briefing as to why. But if you were curious why we didn't apply for actual buses, which operate 20 hours a day, that's why.
Well, we appreciate that feedback. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you to Stacy and Carrie for that review of the work that we've completed in fiscal year 2019. In these next few slides, we have our plans, our tentative plans for how we plan on spending the money that we appropriated in fiscal year 2020. So in these first few months of 2020, we have a lot of work already planned out. As we wrap up the award process for those projects that we started in fiscal year 2019, we will be completing those projects by reporting those emission reductions and submitting reports to Wilmington Trust per our trust agreement requirements. Also, early in the year, we plan on gathering the input that we collect from the public notice period on the public implementation guidelines that are currently out for public notice. And hopefully we will finalize those guidelines shortly after we gather the input so that we can open up the application period for those remaining categories in the coming months. And lastly, we'll be just in conjunction with our VW efforts, we are planning on participating in the EPA federal DERA grant program to help stretch those VW dollars out. So starting with the reporting requirements, as a part of the trust agreement, every state beneficiary is required to submit semi-annual reports. And these reports are required to be submitted to the trustee 6 months after receiving the first distribution of funds from the trust. We in Missouri received our first distribution in February of this year. So we have until August to submit our first report. But the semi-annual reports are due July 30th and January 30th. So our first report, in order to align ourselves with the semi-annual report deadline, we're going to shoot for having our first report out by July 30th. And that report will include very detailed information about who is receiving the funds, the funding amounts, and the NOx reductions that we see from each of the projects. And the details of those reports will be posted on our VW Trust webpage. And if you haven't had a chance to visit our VW webpage, I have a screenshot. It's not really intended for you to be able to read everything on the screen, but this is a screenshot of our DNR homepage. And you can see by that red circle and arrow that the VW Trust link is prominently displayed on our homepage. Click on that, it'll take you directly to our webpage. And if you're familiar with our pollution control program homepage, you can also reach our VW Trust Fund webpage by going to the sidebar there, and you can see there's a list of links, and VW Trust is there at the bottom. So, now looking forward at what our plans are for the distribution of VW funds in fiscal year 2020. We look at our legislative appropriations. So this past couple of weeks, the session closed, I think a couple weeks ago. The General Assembly approved $13.5 million in appropriations authority for the department to spend on eligible projects. They also approved $1 million for the replacement of eligible vehicles in the Department of Corrections fleet. So funding in each of those categories, in each of the categories that we mentioned earlier, one of our 8 categories, will be based on the number of applications that we receive and the types of projects that we receive. But although I'm not able to say exactly how much we will be spending in each category, what I can say is that we will not be spending more than what we have allocated to each category in our beneficiary mitigation plan. That's that slide earlier that Darcy was walking through. So here is our tentative application schedule. As you can see, starting early in the fiscal year, July and August, we will open up an application period for government trucks and transit shuttle buses so that we can receive applications for that set-aside money that Carrie talked about earlier. We still have money set aside for St. Louis, Kansas City, and for government trucks, and I think for the entire areas, all 3 areas for transit shuttle buses. And so we want to make sure we give everybody the opportunity to submit an application to receive some of these funds for these target areas before we turn them over to a statewide application process. And again, that will occur, our tentative plan is to open those up again in July or August, and that's for government trucks and transit shuttle buses. Then later in this calendar year, September, October, we hope to open the application period for non-government trucks, locomotive and marine, airport and cargo equipment, and also for the DERA funds. And you can see on the non-government trucks in the parentheses there, it says target areas. Similar to the government trucks, we have set aside money for the St. Louis area, Kansas City area, and those not in St. Louis or in Kansas City to try to target those areas. And we've set aside that money. That'll be the first set of money that we will target for spending in September and October. Separately, but in conjunction with our VW efforts, we are participating in the federal DERA program. And the reason why I bring this up is because we can use our VW funds to match the grant money that we receive from EPA so that we can receive a bonus amount from EPA. And so the eligibility requirements for DERA projects are slightly different than those of VW projects. So it does allow us to fund projects that may not normally be eligible under VW, such as, I think the last thing in that second bullet talks about stationary generators and pumps. And that's something that's not allowed in the VW Trust. So the funding that we expect to receive is a little under $500,000 in grant money. So prior to opening any application period, we have committed to our stakeholders that we will post our guidelines for comments. Before we finalize those guidelines, we will take input and make sure that we are hearing everybody's opinions on how the guidelines are proposed and how they should be finalized. We currently have 4 out on our webpage for public comment, and the marine and locomotive, airport and cargo equipment, non-government truck, and electric vehicles. We do hope to have the Bureau implementation guideline out soon. But for this next portion of the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Wes, who will guide us through the different requirements of the listed in the implementation guidelines.
Thank you, Emily. So like Emily mentioned, this section of the presentation is going to be about the Category 4, 5, and 6 implementation guidelines, which are on our website now for public review. So like I said, we've got those out for public comment now. These 4, 5, and 6 guidelines, as well as Category 8, which the EV infrastructure, which I won't be going over here. Those are all, they weren't ever finalized, so these are updates based on where we left them off previously, with what we know from our experience with Category 2 and Category 3 over the past fiscal year. Mainly, we're improving readability, trying to take these 8 and 10-page documents and condense them down to like 3 or 4 pages, and then clarify the pertinent requirements as well. We've got future revisions planned for Category 2 government trucks and Category 3 transit and shuttle, as well as school buses. And as Emily mentioned, we're going to try to get DEER out hopefully pretty soon. So with Category 4, this one is open to privately owned Class 4 to 8 diesel trucks with engines from 1992 to 2009. These are federal requirements. That's as broad as we can make those particular requirements. These do have to meet a minimum price per pound, which is how they are going to be ranked. That way we can just get the most NOx emissions reduction and spread, use the money the most efficiently that we can. These projects will have 3 funding pools for the first couple iterations. St. Louis will get approximately $1.5 million. Kansas City gets around $600,000, and everywhere else in the state gets around $900,000. And the price, we will be modifying the price per pound of projects to make the projects in these 8 areas in the state more competitive, just to try to target them like Emily and others have mentioned here. Category 5 is going to be very similar in terms of how it's going to work. They're all going to still be ranked by price per pound. Category 5 is open to switch locomotives, tugboats, and ferries, as well as shore power installations. And if you want more detail on that, there's more detail in the guidelines themselves, as well as in the federal consent decrees Appendix D, which actually goes into a little bit more specifics on what a switch locomotive is and what counts as a tugboat and what counts as a ferry. These ones will compete statewide right from the start, and they have about $2 million set aside for them right now. We are still planning on targeting areas with this amount of money. It's the same 8 areas as previously. Category 6 is open to forklifts and other cargo handling equipment at cargo transportation hubs. Once again, more detail than is here can be found in the guidelines themselves and also in federal consent decree appendix D. This category is somewhat unique compared to the others, since all of the projects in this have to be replaced with electric equipment. The other categories allow a diesel to be replaced with another diesel, but for category 6, they must be replaced or repowered with an electric piece of equipment. And once again, that is in the that's part of the consent decree, and that was so that's as broad as that can be for us. These were all of these will be ranked by price per pound NOx emission reduction, with lowest price per pound receiving awards. These ones will also be competing statewide right from the start and have the same targeting areas and targeting methodology as the other two categories that I've gone over. So comments are going to be due for this June 28th. And you can see there's just a screenshot of a previous slide with our tentative application schedule for the future. It's best if you can give us your comments in writing through email to the MoVW team email, which is on the next slide. Because we will take down comments that we hear today, but it's probably better to make sure we get those in writing. We won't be doing a formal comment response thing like we do with SIPs and rulemaking, but we will make the comments we receive available at some point after June 20th. And here you can see how to get a hold of us if you have comments after the meeting. I think now we're opening it up to anyone who's got some comments here. Thank you.
All right. So what comments, questions, information that you'd like to hear that maybe we didn't cover? Ideas? We'll have Aaron's got a microphone. If you don't have one in front of you, he can bring it over there to you. Maybe we have one. Oh, Pat.
Quick question on budget. The 13.5 million and 1 million. Is the 1 million come out of that?
No, it's on top.
So it's
Yeah.
14.5 total.
Correct. So like this year, there was 6.25 allocated to the Department of Natural Resources to spend its funding and $1 million to corrections. So that's why we added up to about 7.25 this year. So next year will be the 13.5 plus 1 again. Yep.
But it all accounts to the 41.
It all accounts to the 41. Yeah. Oh, question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll get you started. I'll run with comments here. Excuse me, recover from a cold. In the non-government trucks category, and I've got the printout here, on the first page of the document, underneath eligible trucks, you have a list of bullet points there, and there's a set of 5 bullet points there, and the 4th bullet point down, it says, engine is diesel powered and is a model year between 1992 and 2009. Now, my comment there is, I think as we discussed the guidelines prior to this for this category, there was discussion, and I brought it up at one stakeholder meetings as well. There was the way it was written was engine model year. I'm wondering, the way I read this, I think you could read it either way. Engine is diesel powered is model year 92 to 09. I think it would be clearer if that's the direction you want to go to say engine model year there. And the reason why that's important to the non-government truck industry is, and I'll try not to get too deep in the explanation of this, but there's a category of trucks called glider kits. And glider kits basically nowadays is being used as a loophole to avoid emission regulations. It was originally intended for somebody who totaled out a truck. They could take that drivetrain, the engine, the transmission, and the rear axle and put it underneath a 2019 cab and it would apply to the emissions regulations still for whatever model year that engine was built. Now, over the recent years, that's totally changed in the purpose, the way that's being applied. It's become a huge loophole for trucks to avoid emission regulations altogether. What they do is they go out and buy a drivetrain that's been reconditioned, a 99 engine, transmission, and axle, and then they put it on underneath a 2018, 2019 cab that they can buy, and they've got a truck that totally gets them, allows them to drive underneath the radar of all emission regulations. And just from my experience in the industry, there's some other forces there that already are kind of making some of these people who are operating glider kits looking for a way out, looking for an off-ramp to get back into modern emissions trucks. And if we can have that verbiage clearly say their engine model year, it'll give them that off-ramp, and I think it will be very effective as far as achieving the goal of a loss in NOx reduction. So that's my first comment there, and I'll put that in writing and get that to you as well. But one other comment there, and you may have already caught this, the next category down there says underneath the eligible trucks category, then there's another category, list of bullet points that says projects are for funding if. I think the word ineligible is supposed to be in there, just in case you hadn't caught that typo. Just want to bring that to your attention.
Okay, I think we did catch it and we fixed it now, but thank you.
Okay, thanks. Those are my comments.
Yes, thank you.
One of the things that I would add on about that comment about the error that we made, we did fix that error and it is now posted correctly, but if you've opened up the document previous to our fixing the document and you try opening it up again, you may receive that old document. I think it's just the way the web page, the cookies work, so you would have to go and delete your history in order to see the new revised version. So yeah, that's the only thing we changed. We just wanted to make sure, and we caught that, we're like, oh, we need to make sure that that word is in there because it's very important.
Okay, there was a question on the phone, go ahead.
I'd like to get a clarification regarding the changes that are going to be discussed for the buses in transit and the government trucks, whether those changes might apply to the remaining funds from FY19 or if those would only apply to FY20 and future.
Well, so the changes that we were discussing in the presentation aren't really changes to the way we are evaluating the projects. It's more of a clarification on what it is we're looking at. So we were, in order to make sure that we are very clear that we still have the set-aside money for the government trucks and the transit shuttle bus categories, we wanted to make sure we kept those implementation guidelines until we close out that application period. And then once we do that, we will revise those government truck and transit shuttle bus implementation guidelines and post those for public comment before we open up another round of government truck and transit shuttle bus applications.
Okay, so I was just wondering if the comments from KCATA were going to be taken into account regarding the way that the transit agencies are typically funded and their essentially inability to participate in the Volkswagen settlement because of that. So, thank you.
All right, other questions? Yes, sir.
So I have a question, Sarah, Metropolitan Energy Center. My question is, can you give us an idea of what changes specifically you're looking for or looking to make on the transit and government truck categories?
So if you take a look at the non-government truck implementation guidelines, what we did was we simplified the scoring process. Instead of talking about cost effectiveness and getting points for the amount of cost effectiveness that you received. We just kind of took that middle step out, and we're just strictly looking at dollars per pound of NOx reduced. Which is essentially what we were looking at in our original methodology, just simplifying it a little more to make sure that people understood what the underlying reason was for their ranking. And that's what we're really interested in looking at, is seeing